Hello and welcome to another Retro Crazy. This is the ZX81 40th anniversary restoration upgrade part 2. Now in part 1 I have a pair of ZX81s, one in nicer condition than this, still boxed, and we looked inside, we redid everything, and this poor beast is my very original ZX81 from what, about 82, 83, maybe even 81, and it's got holes and it's got power switches and all the rest of it. And this was something I did when I was younger, and we've put it to what it should be to get it all operational. Now the ZX81 was black and white, it had no sound, it had no power button or LED, and it had a whole whopping 1K of memory. So to get anything more than 1K, you needed a Rampack, and that plugged straight in the back, like so, and gave you 16K. And in the first video I said I drilled some holes here and I would explain what they were for later. Well, you can kind of see that they are next to a Rampack, and there is a very, very good reason for that. The ZX81 was known to have what they called Rampack wobble. In other words, remember, this is not a real keyboard as such, it's a membrane with a screen print on top, so you had to push down on everything. And as I'm pushing down on this, you can see on the camera what's happening here. You can see the Rampack interface to the ZX81 actually wobbling. What would happen is be typing away and suddenly poof, your system reset, and that's because it lost connection. So everything just shut down and that was it. You were left absolutely gutted. Now it was bad enough if you were loading something from tape, but if you were typing something in, oh, that was a nightmare. You lost everything. But I don't know if this Rampack works. I mean, look at the movement there. It was so secure. And in this video, we're going to look at some upgrades we can do to the ZX81, and we'll look at refurbishing this Rampack and see if we can get this Rampack working. So at the moment, I'm going to pop this to the side because we are going to look solely at this. So let's get it apart. That's it now apart, and as you can see, it's not a standard 16K that you would expect. It's got a whole bunch of circuitry that you don't expect. There's a good reason for that. So the reason for this extra circuitry is because of the way that the ZX81 supplies power. It doesn't supply 5 volts. It actually feeds the 9 volts from the main power supply through. So what you've got is all this stepping down and all these capacitors, so that this is its own powered unit. Now you have to remember these were made the early 80s. I am going to do the usual. I don't trust old caps, and after having a dig through my parts box, I have a whole bunch of caps to replace, so let's get on with it. So there we have it, new capacitors. I've given it a bit of a clean up because there was a lot of old flux residue from when it was manufactured. I did believe it was flux residue. I had to check at one point because it was all over one of the caps as well, but the cap hadn't been leaking, so. And no distinct smell of fish, which is the other big giveaway. That cap is taller. I'm hoping that won't affect it going back in. So let's drop it back in. And now that's done, the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to use a little bit of deoxit and drop it onto the contacts. And then I'm going to work it in and out of the ZX81. Now that's done, let's test it. Right, the 16K Rampack is now plugged into the ZX81. I've typed in a small program. I'll need to do this manually, so bear with me. Can you read that, hopefully? Yep, excellent. I'm going to move the camera so it faces up and catches the screen more. There we go. I'm now going to run this, and this should, it takes the memory locations, it pokes a value into each location all the way up until it then reads it back by peaking that location, and if the value we put in, which is 0, is not there, then it kicks out and prints the memory size. So let's run this and see what happens. And there we go, it's come out at line 50, which is the end. Memory size 16.054683K, or is that 88K? 88K. So we've got a 16K Rampack which is working, and we've got a ZX81 which is working. Let's see what we can do about that picture now. So we've done the testing on the 16K Rampack, it's working great. So we've now got a 16K ZX81, but let's face it, that picture is terrible, absolutely terrible. But there is a solution, and that solution is this little device. This is from ZX Renew, and it's a composite video mod. So what we're going to do is turn this, the output here, into a composite video rather than RF. That should give us a much better picture. Now I've already done a test fit to see where it's going to go. These pins do not normally come supplied at that angle, just for the location I'm going to be using. They kind of need to be at that angle, at 45 degrees roughly, for the output, because they're going to sit underneath the keyboard, and yeah, not a lot of room. Now when you purchase this, it does come with a nice set of downloadable instructions, which I have printed, and this is what I'm going to be following. So let's crack on. There we go, that's it out. You can see how easy it is to disconnect everything now that I've got these pin headers soldered everywhere. Also, there's no heat at all in there. If that had been a 7805, that would have been red hot. There's a little warmth in all the chips. Not much, in fact that's cold. What I will be doing is putting a nice heat sink on this ULA. Try and keep its temperature down, get it to survive for as long as possible. So the first thing it says on this mod is to gently take off the lid of the UHF modulator, or the RF module, or whatever you want to call it. And now we need to desolder this resistor off of the RCA socket. I'm being careful to do this as best I can so I don't damage any of this, so that it can be reverted if need be. Next, we need to disconnect this wire and this wire. This particular wire is the 5V supply, and this is the video in signal. Now that they're safely to the side, we need to start installing some pin headers so that we can get some supply feed in. We're going to need 5V. We're going to need the video signal. We're going to need ground. And last but not least, I am going to attach this just in here so that we have, my goodness, so that we have a point to connect to for the new signal out. So let's solder these up. And there we go. Now I'm not worried about these touching because they are now not feeding anything. There's no 5V in, there's no signal in, nothing. Ground is still attached, that's fine because we're going to need it. However, we now have 4-pin headers which match up with the 4-pin headers here. So let's reassemble. Now it's starting to get a mass of different cables. There is a little trick that you can use to try and keep these a bit neater. Now normally you could heat shrink all that together and make it nice and neat, but then that makes it quite inflexible. So take your heat shrink and snip it into some little loops. You can slide it to where you need it, and when we heat shrink that and heat it, it'll hold them there, and we do another one and then we do another one, and that gives you a nice little way of holding some cables together without the need to heat shrink absolutely everything. Now I could have used just a strip of 4 of these patch leads together, but then you'll see that I like to keep the colours right. That way you can see which one's power, which one's ground. That's that all back together. There's no longer a requirement for this. The theory is, I suppose, we could try and put it on, just have the cable coming out the hole, make it look a little bit more original, but I don't know if it'll go in the case with that. Only one way to find out. Well, here we are again. Now I've got this big thick RCA cable connected up to the ZX81 and into the yellow input, which hopefully will be composite on the back of the telly. Now, just to confirm, at the moment we're on channel 47. Does the ZX81 still power up? That'll be a yes, but no video output on channel 37. So let's check the video source. Well, it detected PAL, but I've got nothing. That is always a possibility according to the instructions, and it may mean that we need to tune some of the pots to get it to work properly. So let's have a look at that next. So I've got the ZX81 open. It's in pieces here. You can see the board. It is all still plugged up. And by default, it comes with, if you can see the jumpers on the red block, one is on, two is off, and that's what they call back porch mode. So it says with this function you can tweak the picture with the two trim pots. But there's also no back porch, so let's try that. So jumper 1 off, jumper 2 on, everything's still connected. There we go. And look at how much clearer that is. Wow, nice. The interference pattern you're seeing on the screen, I do not see. There's nothing there, it's just clear. So that's being picked up by the camera. So are we finished? Is that all you can do with the ZX81? No, it's not. So let's get it back up on the table. So now we're back on the blue mat. What else could we do? Well, I've already done the 16K Rampack, but that doesn't alleviate the issue with the Rampack wobble. But the actual ZX81 itself can take up to about 64K internally. So is there not some way of building the 16K into this to remove the need for the Rampack wobble? Well, there is. There are a number of chips out there that we can use. The 43256, the 55257 or the 62256, and the latter being the most popular one that I've seen. I just happen to have a 55257 and I'm hoping this mod will work quite happily with this. So let's use this to upgrade this to its, or more like its full potential as it would have been back in the day. So now that the circuit board's back out, what I'm going to do is desolder this memory module to start with. Well, that's all done, but it took me a lot longer than I expected because I managed to tear the nozzle of my solder sucker, so I'm going to have to order some replacements up. However, that's now out. That can now go to the side, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not going to solder this directly in. I'm actually going to use these little pin standoffs. I don't currently have a socket that's large enough, but I've got two of these turn pin header sockets, so I'll break these off, drop them in, solder them in place. Well, it seems I'm quite lucky, this being an issue 1 board. I need to actually connect link 2. Link 1's already connected. Now, on most of the videos I've seen, it's actually just traces that you've got to solder a point across. This actually has through holes, so what I'm going to do is take out link 1, unplug the holes, and I'm going to use a pin header because then I can literally jumper the link to get this to work, because what I'm looking for is a way of doing this where if I needed to, I could plug that back in and get the original 1K back. Let me desolder this, solder the pin header in. So with that soldered in, that's ready just for a jumper. I may have to bend it over because next is fitting this chip, and some of the legs have to be bent out because we're going to be attaching to them rather than the legs being directly attached to the motherboard. In fact, before I do that, I am going to use a device that I've got sitting, because it doesn't quite fit in here, and if I start bending this before it's fitted, I could have issues. And the issues I could have is actually trying to get this chip to go in, because at the moment the legs line up on that side but they're too wide on this side, and that's because naturally new chips, the legs are not parallel. So I'm going to see if I can straighten them with this. It's just a little device that's designed to straighten the legs of chips. There's this side, and for your narrower ones you've got the opposite side. Those legs should now hopefully be perfectly in line, which they are. They're ready to drop in. So now I can look at bending the legs out. So the main chip itself, there are a number of pins now that I do need to bend out, starting with pin 1, and pin 1 go from the notch top left. And I'm just going to do that by grabbing the leg and very gently bending it out. And what I'm doing is each time I'm bending it a little and then allowing the jaws to open and push up to the middle of the chip. So each time I'm going further and further into the leg so that it will actually come cleanly away from the body of the chip. That's pin 1. Next is pin 26, and we simply count down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, kick over, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Next is pin 21, which is here. There's this leg. '23's next. And lastly, 26. That's now ready to be inserted into the board. And you can see this is what I was worried about. So I'm going to take these pin headers and just bend them down at an angle. Now that the pin headers are down, I can safely install this chip, making sure all the legs go in, except obviously the ones we've bent out. Once you're happy and none of the legs are missing, equal pressure, and insert the chip. So the final thing to do is to connect up these pins to the respective diodes that they need to go to. Pin 1 is going to go to diode 1, 21 to diode 2, 23 to diodes 3 and then 26 to diode 5. So I'm just going to tin the legs of these, ready to accept wires. So I was trying to work out if there was a way to make this, you know, fairly easy to pop in and out, and I don't think there is an easy way. I thought about using patch leads, but the legs are just too thin for that to work. So what I am going to do is I'm going to solder it using some very fine wire, and I'll just run this to each one as it needs to go. I'm going to leave the tail end of the legs on, because should this not work, it allows me to desolder it, clean it up, and hopefully reuse the chip for something else. And as long as I solder, you know, quite cleanly, there should be no major issues. So let's get some of this wire set up ready. I'm going to try and keep it as neat as I can, run it, and we'll see where we go from there. So with that done and everything in place, we can see now that this wire runs from pin 1 down to diode 1, from pin 23 down to diode 2, pin 21 I should say, to diode 2, pin 23 to diode 3, and pin 26 to diode 5. Last thing to do is grab a jumper, plug it in, and that hopefully will be done. I'm going to do one more thing before this goes back on, and that's to fit a couple of heat sinks onto the ULA and the Z80, just to keep them cool, or cooler. Now let's pop all this back together. So now we're ready for testing. Does it still power on? Oh yes. Right, I'm going to type in the same program as I did previously, and let's see what we get. So that's all typed back in, ready to be run. Let's see what happens. What do we get? Memory size 16K, success. We now have 16K internally, no Rampack. So I would call that a big win. Let's pop back to the blue mat. So that's the trusty ZX81 done. It now has an internal 16K memory. It has a composite output. I fixed the Rampack. What more is there to do? Well, you could go and get yourself a fancy case to drop it in and all that sort of thing. But you know what? I like it as it is. There's a couple of things I am going to do to this particular one. First of all, I would like to thank Retro Computer Repairs and Sales for supplying me my compliment. I got a nice mint when I ordered off of eBay set of feet. And yeah, very nice, thank you. So I'll clean the back of this up, I'll fit the feet, I'll find some replacement screws to replace the missing ones in the case. I've got 3 of them. I need to get a slightly oversized one for this one. Give it a clean, get the feet on, and it's done. So I hope you've enjoyed this little upgrade video on the trusty ZX81. Happy 40th, and maybe you have another 40 years before needing anything done. Take care. Please remember to like and subscribe. Feel free to comment, by the way, if you liked what you saw, or if you would have done something differently, or if you just didn't like what I did. But whatever happens, I'll see you on the next Retro Crazy.